They told him that memories were fleeting, that they were just echoes of the past, nothing more than remnants of a life already lived. But Jonathan Reed knew better. The dreams he had been having weren't dreams at all. They were fragments of a past that had been locked away in the deepest recesses of his mind. They were not just memories. They were instructions coded into his DNA, memories of a life he never lived, of battles fought on distant worlds, of wars that were not his own, but they felt real. They felt as though they had happened to him, as if they were part of him. And now they were coming back with a vengeance, piece by piece. They began to fall into place, each dream more vivid than the last, each memory sharper, more defined, as if his very cells were beginning to remember what they were made to do. They told him that humans had no place in the greater galactic order, that they were just another primitive species clinging to life on a backwater planet. But they were wrong. Jonathan was not just a man from Earth. He was something more, something far more dangerous. He was a weapon, one created not by natural evolution, but by design. And that design had been hidden away deep within him for years, locked behind layers of false memories and suppressed emotions. But now that design was awakening, and with it came the power to fight, to destroy, and to survive in environments so harsh that even the most advanced species in the galaxy would have no chance of surviving. Jonathan had been created for one reason: to be the ultimate soldier, the ultimate weapon. And now that he was starting to remember what he was made for, he could feel the power growing within him. It wasn't just a matter of memories returning. It was the awakening of the very essence of who he was, the raw genetic programming that had been embedded in his DNA from the moment he was conceived. The ability to adapt to any environment, to fight any opponent, to overcome any obstacle. It was as if his body was transforming. In response to the unlocking of these memories, his senses sharpened. His reflexes improved, his strength grew, as if every part of him was being optimized for a singular purpose: to fight, to conquer, to survive. And Jonathan could feel it. He could feel the power coursing through his veins, the need to fight surging within him. And it terrified him, because he knew that once he fully embraced this power, there would be no turning back. Once he fully unlocked the potential that had been hidden from him for so long, there would be no way to stop what he had been created to do. He would become the weapon he had been designed to be. And that weapon would not be controlled, not by the galactic powers who had created him, not by any other species that thought they could stand in his way. He was not just another soldier in the ranks of the galaxy's armies. He was a weapon of mass destruction, created for the singular purpose of victory. And now that he was beginning to remember who he truly was, he could feel the weight of that purpose pressing down on him. It was as if his very existence had been built for this moment, built to fight for a cause that no longer mattered to him, but to something much greater, to something far more important. The survival of the species that had created him. Jonathan was not just a man from Earth. He was a tool forged for war. And now that he had started to remember what he was truly made for, he could feel the call of that war stirring deep within him. It was no longer about his own survival. It was about fulfilling his purpose, the purpose that had been designed for him from the beginning. And no matter how much he tried to resist it, no matter how much he wanted to hold on to the man he had been, the truth was undeniable. He had been created to fight, created to kill. And now, he was finally remembering how to do it. He had been abandoned, left behind on a planet that was no more than a test ground for his abilities. But now he knew that his purpose was not to be forgotten. It was not to remain hidden away. It was to rise to power, to take control of his own destiny, and to show the galaxy the true strength of the weapon they had created. Because Jonathan Reed was no longer just a man, he was Subject E7R31D, the ultimate weapon, the product of a design that could not be erased. And now that he was awakening to the truth, there was no going back. There was only one thing left to do: embrace the power that was his birthright and unleash it on the galaxy to fulfill the purpose that had been written into his very being from the start. And when the time came, the universe would know what it had created. they would know what Jonathan Reed had become, and they would remember that they had made a weapon like no other. They had always told Jonathan that the path to knowledge was through logic and reason, but what they failed to tell him was that the true knowledge was hidden deep within the very fabric of his being, encoded in the DNA that made him who he was. The truth was not in the books he studied, or in the languages he had dedicated his life to understanding. It was embedded in him from the start, like a secret program waiting to be unlocked. As the memories began to surface, Jonathan realized that his body had been engineered for more than just survival. It had been designed for war, designed to be a weapon in a conflict that spanned the galaxy, a conflict that he had never been told about. But now the clues were clear. It all began with the dreams, the fragmented memories of battles fought on distant worlds, filled with creatures of unimaginable forms, and advanced technologies that could not exist on Earth. Yet they felt real. They felt familiar, like something buried deep inside his psyche was waking up, calling to him. And it wasn't just the images in his mind. It was his body, too, that began to change. At first, he thought it was just stress, maybe the product of his overactive imagination. But as the days passed and the dreams intensified, he started noticing subtle changes in himself. His strength, his reflexes, his senses all seemed sharper and more acute. Like his body was becoming more in tune with something primal, something he was only beginning to understand. He started to remember flashes of a life he had never lived, but somehow felt intimately familiar. The feel of foreign weapons in his hands. The sound of his commands echoed across battlefields. The cold, mechanical precision with which he moved, as though his body already knew what to do even before his mind could catch up. It was as though a different version of himself was speaking to him through these memories. A version of himself that was a soldier, a fighter, a weapon created to be part of something much larger than the quiet life he had always known. It was then that the truth began to reveal itself to him. Jonathan Reed was not just a linguistics professor. He was a creation, an engineered being, made for one purpose and one purpose alone, to be a weapon to fight and survive in the most extreme conditions imaginable. And as the memories returned with each passing night, Jonathan could feel the power building within him, the power of what he was meant to be, but also the fear of what that meant. For the first time in his life, he felt like an outsider in his own body, like a stranger who had suddenly become aware of a force greater than himself, a force he was not sure he could control, and yet he knew that he had no choice but to accept it. Because it was who he was, it was what he was made to be. As he struggled to come to terms with this revelation, Jonathan couldn't help but wonder why he had been left on Earth, why the beings who had created him had abandoned him on this planet that was nothing more than a prison in the farthest corner of the galaxy. Had they forgotten about him? Had they decided that he was no longer needed? Or had they left him here to die, forgotten and alone? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that they had made a mistake. A fatal mistake. Because now that the memories were returning, now that he was beginning to understand his true nature, nothing could hold him back. Nothing could stop him from becoming what he was always meant to be. The dreams were not just dreams, they were memories of a life he had once lived. Memories of battles fought in alien wars that no human had ever known. But now those battles were calling to him again. They were awakening something inside him that he could no longer ignore. The soldier that had been hidden within him for so long was starting to rise to the surface. And Jonathan knew that once he fully embraced this power, there would be no turning back. There would be no more hiding. No more pretending to be just another professor. No more living a quiet life among the humans who had no idea what he was truly capable of. He was no longer Jonathan Reed, the scholar, the teacher, the man he was, Subject E7, R31D, a biological weapon designed for war. And now he was ready to fulfill the purpose he had been created for, to fight, to survive, and to destroy anything that stood in his way. The galaxy had no idea what it was about to face, because they had underestimated him. They had thought that by leaving him on Earth, they had silenced him. They had thought that by burying him on a planet that no one cared about, they could keep him locked away forever. But they were wrong. The time had come for Jonathan to rise to embrace what he had become, to awaken the weapon that had been designed in him from the very beginning, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. He was not just another soldier. He was the culmination of something much more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. He was a force of nature, and now that he had unlocked the truth of who he was, the universe would have to answer for the mistakes they had made. There was no going back. Now there was no way to undo what had been set into motion the moment he had begun to remember, the moment the true purpose of his existence had begun to rise within him. Jonathan Reed had been abandoned by his creators, but now he would make them regret the decision. He would show them the full extent of the weapon they had created, and he would not stop until the galaxy knew that humans were not to be underestimated, that they were not to be forgotten, that they were a force to be reckoned with. And when he rose to power, no one would stand in his way, not the peacekeepers, not the alien empires, not anyone who thought they could control him, because Jonathan was no longer just a man, he was a weapon, and the universe was about to feel the full weight of his power. Jonathan could no longer ignore what had begun to stir deep within him, the knowledge that he was not the person he had always believed himself to be. What he had once thought were strange dreams and fleeting thoughts were now becoming memories, the kind of memories that felt too real, too vivid to be anything but true. They were not his. They were pieces of someone else's life. Someone who had been a soldier, a fighter, not just any soldier, but the ultimate soldier, the one created to fight in battles that no human could possibly survive. The kind of soldier whose body and mind had been engineered for one purpose only: war. The fight to conquer and destroy those who stood in the way of those who created him. Jonathan remembered the sensations, the sounds, the movements. He could see it all as if he were reliving it, as if it were happening right in front of him. But he had never been there before. He had never fought those battles yet. Everything in his body told him that it had happened to him, that he had been there, that he had fought, and that he had been made for this. He was being drawn into it, more and more each day, pulled further away from the man he once was, into the soldier he had been designed to be, and it terrified him. But what terrified him even more was the realization that he had no choice in the matter, that this awakening was beyond his control. These were not just random memories. These were the result of something that had been put into his DNA, something so deep, so fundamental, that it was beyond the reach of his own conscious will. It was not just his mind that was affected, but his very biology. His cells were responding to the trigger, like a program running through his body, activating each and every dormant gene that had been placed there to make him something else, someone far more dangerous than the man who had once spent his days studying ancient texts and lost languages. He had been created to be a weapon, a biological soldier designed to survive and thrive in the most extreme conditions. And now that he was beginning to remember the full extent of his purpose, he felt it taking over him. He could feel the warrior within him, the part of himself that had been hidden so deeply for so long, now emerging, fighting to take control, pushing aside the parts of him that still clung to the idea of a peaceful life, a normal life. The part of him that still wanted to believe he was just a man and not a tool of war. But the truth was undeniable. And with each passing day, Jonathan felt himself changing physically, emotionally, his body growing stronger, his mind becoming sharper, his reflexes quicker, his senses more acute. It was as though every part of him was becoming tuned to the rhythm of a war machine, a soldier who had been made to fight, a soldier who had been designed to lead and survive at any cost. The more Jonathan remembered, the more his fear grew, the fear of losing himself, the fear of becoming something else entirely, something he could not control. And yet there was a part of him that welcomed it, a part that wanted to embrace what he had been made to do, because as much as it terrified him, it also gave him a sense of purpose, a clarity that he had never experienced before in his life. It made him feel alive in a way he never had before. but it also made him feel like a stranger in his own body, as if he were being torn between two worlds. One, where he was Jonathan Reed, the man who had once dreamed of a quiet life, and another where he was Subject E7 R31D, the weapon, the soldier, the creation of a species far more advanced than his own, a species that had left him on Earth to forget his true purpose. But now he was remembering it all, and he was realizing that he was not the one who would choose his fate. The fate of the soldier was determined by the battle, the war that he had been created to fight in. And the war was coming. Jonathan could feel it. The soldiers who had been created alongside him, the other weapons, they were waking up too. They were all being activated as the signal that had been buried deep within their minds began to resonate again. And with that signal came the understanding that it was time, the time had come for them to fulfill their purpose, to rise up and take their place in the galaxy as soldiers of a forgotten war. A war that had been left to die in the corners of the universe. But now that war was about to resurface, and the weapons that had been left behind would once again take their rightful place in it. And Jonathan knew that once he embraced his true nature, once he let go of the man he had once been, there would be no going back. There would be no room for peace, no room for quiet moments of reflection, no more moments of hesitation. He would become the soldier he had been created to be, and he would fight with everything he had because that was what he was made to do. He had been abandoned to Earth, to live out a life in obscurity. But now that life was ending, the memories had returned, and with them came the understanding of his true role in the universe, a role that was far greater than anything he had ever imagined before. The galaxy would not forget him again. Jonathan Reed had been designed to fight, to destroy, and now he would show them all just how dangerous he could be. Jonathan Reed's mind raced as the truth began to unfold before him in a way that he had never anticipated. The memories, the visions, the flashes of intense battles, and the strange alien landscapes were not just fragments of his imagination. They were his past, buried deep within him, locked away by forces beyond his control. He had always thought of himself as nothing more than a regular man, a linguistics professor with an ordinary life, but the truth was far more unsettling than he could have ever imagined. He was not just Jonathan Reed, the scholar, the teacher. He was Subject E7 R31D, a biological weapon created by a race far more advanced than humanity could ever hope to be. He was not just an ordinary person. He was a soldier, a weapon designed for one purpose: to fight, to conquer, and to destroy. The memories began to flood back with overwhelming intensity. Each night as he closed his eyes to sleep, he was no longer just the man he had known all his life. Instead, he was transported to alien battlefields surrounded by monstrous beings that defied all logic and reason. Creatures that were part machine, part living entity, each one an enemy in a war that seemed to span the entire galaxy. The weapons in his hands felt like extensions of his very being, as though his body knew exactly what to do, even before his mind could catch up. The battles were fierce and relentless, but Jonathan moved with precision and ease, striking with a grace and power that no ordinary human could ever achieve. These were not just dreams, they were memories deeply embedded in his DNA, activated by a signal he could neither understand nor resist. They had been implanted in him, a purpose that had been designed from the moment he was created. He had been born to fight, born to survive in the harshest conditions imaginable, to endure pain and destruction that would break any ordinary being, and to emerge victorious every time. His very body had been engineered for this purpose. His muscles, his bones, his mind all enhanced to become a living weapon. The more Jonathan remembered, the more he realized the terrifying truth. He was not human, not in the way he had thought. His body, his mind, his very essence had been altered to create a weapon of war. The memories now flooding back with increasing clarity were like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered and forgotten, but now they were starting to fit together. He was not just a soldier. He was the ultimate soldier, designed to survive and win at any cost. The feeling of power that coursed through him was intoxicating. but it was also deeply unsettling. He had spent his entire life as Jonathan Reed, the man who taught and researched, never knowing the truth about what he truly was. Now that the truth was emerging, he felt as though he was losing himself, as if the man he had been was slipping away, replaced by the weapon he had been created to be. The memories were not just battle scenes. They were strategies, instructions, embedded in his very cells, designed to make him the perfect soldier. His DNA had been altered, his genetic code rewritten to create the ultimate fighting machine capable of surviving and thriving in the most hostile environments. He could feel the difference in himself. His senses were sharper, his body stronger, his reflexes quicker. It was as if every part of him had been reprogrammed for one thing. Or Navi, he had always believed that he was in control of his own life, that his choices determined his future. But now, with the awakening of these memories, Jonathan realized the painful truth: he had never been in control. From the moment he was created, his life had been predetermined. He had been designed to be a tool, a weapon to be used in a war that was not his to fight. And now, as the memories returned in full force, Jonathan felt himself being pulled into something much larger than himself. The man he had been, the life he had known, was slipping away, replaced by the cold, calculated instincts of a soldier. His mind raced as he struggled to come to terms with the truth. He was not just a man. He was a product, a creation made for war. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. His entire life, every decision he had made, every path he had chosen, had been irrelevant. He had been shaped and molded by forces beyond his comprehension, designed to be the perfect weapon in a galaxy-spanning war. And now that war was calling to him, the signal had been sent. The time had come. He could feel it deep within him, in the very marrow of his bones. He was not just Jonathan Reed. He was Subject E7R31D, a weapon created to fight, to conquer, to destroy. The memories flooded him like a torrent, overwhelming him with their intensity. He could hear the commands in his mind, the battle strategies, the voices of those who had once fought alongside him. The battles had been brutal, unforgiving, and yet he had emerged victorious each time. But with each victory there had been a cost, and the cost had been his humanity. The more he remembered, the more he realized that the man he had once been, the man who had walked this earth, was no longer there. He had been replaced by something else, something far more dangerous, something that no one could control. And now that this new identity, this new purpose, was awakening within him, Jonathan understood that there was no going back. There was no returning to the life he had known. The memories had returned, and with them, his true nature had been unlocked. He was a weapon designed to fight and destroy, and the universe would soon know the truth that Jonathan Reed was no more. The truth that Subject E7R31D was born to rise again. Jonathan stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection, as a wave of realization washed over him. He was no longer the same man he had once been. He had thought for so long that he was just an ordinary human with a thirst for knowledge and a passion for studying ancient civilizations. But now the truth was undeniable. The dreams, the memories, the flashes of battles fought on alien worlds, they weren't just figments of his imagination. They were his past, a past that had been buried deep within him for as long as he could remember. They had been locked away from him for a reason, because what they revealed was far too dangerous, far too powerful for him to control, at least. That's what he had been told. But now that he had started to remember everything, he understood the truth. He wasn't just a man, he was something far more dangerous, something that had been created for one purpose, and one purpose alone: to fight, and to survive at any cost. Jonathan's body felt different. His muscles had grown, stronger, his senses were sharper, and his mind was clearer than ever before. Every part of him had been enhanced for battle, every instinct honed for survival. The more he tapped into these memories, the more his power grew. He could feel it inside of him. It was as though the true potential of who he was slowly being unlocked piece by piece, like a dormant engine being brought to life. And yet there was a part of him that feared this transformation, feared the man he was becoming because he knew that once he fully embraced this power, he would be a different person altogether. He would no longer be the man who had spent his days studying the past and pondering the mysteries of the universe. He would be a soldier, a warrior trained for one thing and one thing only: to fight and to win. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. The power within him wasn't just the result of his natural ability. It was something much deeper. It had been encoded into his DNA long before he had ever walked this earth, long before he had even known what he was meant to be. The truth was he had been designed for war, and the knowledge that came with that truth terrified him, because it meant that everything he had known about himself was a lie. Every dream he had about a peaceful life, every hope he had for a future without violence, was nothing but a fantasy designed to keep him from realizing his true nature. He had been created to be the perfect soldier, and everything in his body, every part of his being, was a testament to that design. His physical strength was unparalleled, his ability to heal from injuries far beyond anything a normal human could experience. His mind was sharper, more strategic, more lethal than any of the soldiers he had studied in history. But all of this came at a price, because with every new ability he unlocked, he felt the humanity within him slipping away. The man he had once been was fading into the background as the soldier he had been designed to be took over, and that was what scared him the most. The thought that he would lose himself entirely, that he would become nothing more than a weapon, a tool created for war, and nothing more. But the truth was that part of him had already been erased. The man who had studied ancient languages and dreamt of a life of peace was gone, replaced by the soldier who had been bred for battle. The memories of his training, the endless battles fought on alien worlds, now felt like part of his own existence, as though they were locked away inside of him, ready to surface at any moment. They were the key to unlocking his true potential, and now that he had begun to access them, there was no going back. No way to turn back the clock on the person he had been before, because in the end, Jonathan wasn't just human. He was a weapon created for a war that stretched across galaxies. And even though he didn't remember the war itself, the truth of who he was undeniable. He had been made to fight, made to destroy, made to survive at any cost, and as the memories continued to surface, he felt the power growing within him. He could hear the voices of his creators, the beings who had designed him, who had engineered his DNA to make him the perfect soldier. Their plans, their designs, everything that had been hidden from him was now coming into focus, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before he would have to make a choice: embrace what he had become, or fight against it. But fighting against it meant fighting against his very nature, and Jonathan knew deep down that he couldn't do that. He couldn't reject the truth of what he was. He couldn't ignore the reality that had been thrust upon him, because in the end, he had been created to fight to win, and now that he had begun to remember everything he had been designed to do, he understood that there was no escaping it. This was his purpose. This was why he had been created, and the only thing left for him to do was accept it and embrace the soldier he had been made to be, to rise to the occasion and fulfill his destiny. But even as he made that decision, a small part of him wondered if he could ever truly accept it. Could he ever truly become the soldier he had been designed to be, or would he always carry the weight of the man he had once been, with him always questioning his place in the universe and his role in the grand scheme of things? But those thoughts were fleeting, because Jonathan knew that once he fully embraced the power within him, there would be no more doubt, no more hesitation, no more questions. He would be the weapon he was meant to be, and nothing would stand in his way. Nothing would stop him from fulfilling his purpose, even if it meant losing the last vestiges of the man he had once been. Jonathan stood still, his mind racing, as the truth began to slowly unfold, the pieces falling into place in a way he had never expected for so long. He had believed his life was just a series of coincidences, but now the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together in ways that were impossible to ignore. The memories that had once seemed like mere dreams were starting to make sense. They were not just fragments of his mind. They were memories of something much deeper, something buried beneath layers of falsehoods and hidden truths deep within his DNA. And as he stood there, his body seemed to recognize the truth. Even before his mind fully accepted it, he had been made for this. He had been created not just as a man, but as something far more than human. He had been engineered for war, designed to survive in the harshest environments and to fight against impossible odds. His body had been built for conflict. Every muscle, every nerve, every cell had been fine-tuned to perform under extreme stress, to adapt to the unimaginable. And what terrified him the most was that now that the memories were surfacing, he could feel the power returning to him, the power he had never known was there before, yet had always been a part of him. And as this power surged within him, he realized the true nature of his existence. He was no ordinary man, no longer a scholar of ancient languages or a simple professor of linguistics. He was a weapon created by an advanced race far beyond human comprehension. A race that had abandoned him long ago on this backwater planet, with no knowledge of his true nature, with no understanding of what he was truly capable of. And now, as the memories returned with vivid clarity, Jonathan knew that he had been designed for one purpose, only to be a soldier to fight and to win in wars that no human could possibly survive. But he was more than just a soldier. He was the ultimate weapon. His very being had been optimized for destruction, for combat. He was an instrument of war created for a conflict that was far beyond his understanding. A conflict that spanned galaxies and involved forces that were so far beyond human comprehension that they had deemed humanity insignificant, too primitive, too weak to ever pose a threat. But that was before they had made him, before they had created him as a weapon, before they had embedded within him the knowledge of how to fight, how to survive, how to conquer. And now, as Jonathan began to awaken to his true nature, he realized that he could no longer deny what he was. He had been created for war. He had been made to destroy, to fight, and to survive, no matter what the cost. And now that the memories were flooding back, he could feel the weight of his purpose, the power coursing through him. It was as though every part of his being had been designed to perform in a battle that would never end. And as this realization hit him, he understood that he could never return to the life he once knew. He could never go back to being just Jonathan Reed, the professor, the quiet man who had spent his days studying ancient languages and researching obscure cultures. He was something far more dangerous. Now he was a weapon, and with that weapon came the responsibility of knowing what he was capable of, and the terrifying knowledge that there would be no turning back once he fully embraced his true nature. Once he allowed the soldier inside him to take control, there would be no room for hesitation, no room for doubt. He had been made for this. He had been designed to fight, to destroy, and to survive in the most extreme conditions imaginable. And now, he had to face the reality of what that meant. He had been created as a tool of war to fight against forces that no human could ever hope to overcome. And now that he was remembering his true purpose, he could feel the pull of that destiny calling to him from deep within his being. It was a part of him that could not be ignored, a part of him that had been buried for so long. But now that it was awakened, there was no denying it, no running from it. He had been created to fight, and that was exactly what he was going to do, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences, because in the end, Jonathan Reed no longer existed. All that remained was Subject E7 R31D, the soldier, the weapon, the force of destruction that had been created to change the course of the galaxy. And with that knowledge came a terrifying sense of clarity. He knew that he would never be the same again, that the person he had once been was gone, replaced by something much more lethal, much more powerful, and much more dangerous to everyone around him. And as he accepted his fate, he realized that the galaxy was about to experience a force it had never encountered before, and it would tremble at the power he had unlocked from deep within his own DNA, because Jonathan Reed was no more. He had been replaced by the ultimate weapon, and there was no going back. No escaping what he had been made to do. He was born for war. And now that war was calling to him in a way that was impossible to ignore. They had left him alone for so long, had thought they could just leave him on Earth, abandoned, forgotten. But now Jonathan Reed realized the truth. The truth that they had underestimated him. They thought that by isolating him, they could erase him from the galaxy's memory. But they were wrong, because Jonathan Reed was still alive. And with each passing day, he was remembering more and more about who he really was, and what he was created for. The past that had been buried inside of him was waking up memories of battles fought on distant planets, of enemies defeated, and comrades lost. These weren't just dreams. These were fragments of a reality that had been hidden from him for so long, locked away in his DNA, like a program waiting to be activated. And now that he was beginning to remember everything, he understood what he had been made for. He wasn't just a man from Earth. He wasn't just a teacher or a scholar. He was a weapon, a biological tool created to fight and to survive in the harshest conditions imaginable. And as the memories returned to him, piece by piece, he began to feel the power growing inside of him. It wasn't just in his mind, it was in his body too. He could feel the changes happening within himself, his strength growing, his senses sharpening, his reflexes quicker and more precise. It was as though his very being was being rewired, reprogrammed for one purpose, only to fight, to destroy, to win. And the more he remembered, the more he understood the terrifying reality of his existence. He was not human, not in the way he had once believed. He was a creation, a product of an ancient species that had designed him to be the perfect soldier, a weapon for a war that had long been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy, but not by him, not by the body. He was in his body, had been designed for one thing and one thing only: to fight and to survive. And the more Jonathan understood this, the more he began to fear what he was becoming, because he knew that once he fully embraced this power, once he fully understood his true purpose, there would be no going back. He could never return to the life he had once known. He could never go back to being the man who had studied languages and dreamed of a peaceful life. He would be a soldier, a weapon, and that terrified him, because it meant that his humanity would be lost. The more he embraced the soldier inside him, the more the man he had been faded away. And as the memories continued to flood back, he began to feel the weight of his purpose pressing down on him. It was as though everything in his life had been leading to this moment, leading to the realization that he was no longer just a man, but a weapon, a soldier bred for war, and nothing could stop him from fulfilling his destiny. Nothing could stop him from becoming what he had been designed to be. And that terrified him even more than anything else, because once he gave into this, he would no longer be able to deny what he was, what he had been made to do. He would be a tool of war. Not just any tool, but the ultimate tool, a soldier so powerful, so deadly that no one in the galaxy could stand against him. And the more he remembered, the more he understood that the galaxy had made a grave mistake when they thought they could leave him behind. They thought they could forget about him, but they were wrong, because he was not forgotten. And now that he remembered everything, now that the soldier within him had awakened, he could feel the power of his true purpose coursing through him like fire through his veins. And he knew that the galaxy would soon understand that he was not to be underestimated. Not anymore. Not after what he was about to become. He was no longer Jonathan Reed. The man he had once been was gone, replaced by the weapon he had been designed to be. And now that he understood his true nature, there would be no stopping him. No one could control him anymore. No one could contain him. And the galaxy would have to face the consequences of what they had created, a weapon like no other. A soldier who was not bound by the rules of war, by the rules of survival, but a soldier who was born for destruction, born to conquer. And the moment the rest of the galaxy understood that Jonathan Reed was no longer the man they had once forgotten, would be the moment they would understand that the universe had just made a terrible mistake. Because Jonathan was coming, and with him came the power to change everything, to reshape the galaxy as he saw fit. Because he was no longer a pawn in the game, he was the game itself, and no one would stand in his way, no one would survive the wrath of Subject E7R31D. Jonathan had always believed that humanity was weak compared to the vastness of the galaxy, but now, as the pieces of his true purpose began to fall into place, he understood how wrong he had been. It was not weakness that defined humanity, it was strength. It was the ability to adapt, survive, and conquer in ways no other species in the galaxy could comprehend. The memories that had once seemed like fleeting dreams were now becoming a reality. The battles, the war, the enemies he had fought, the victories, won, all of it was encoded within him, like a program waiting to be activated. He wasn't just a man from Earth, he wasn't just Jonathan Reed, a scholar, a teacher. He was something far more dangerous, something far more powerful. He was the weapon that no one had expected humanity to ever produce, the ultimate soldier forged from the very DNA of the universe's greatest designs, a product of war and destruction, built for one singular purpose: to fight, to win, to survive, and to ensure that humanity would no longer be underestimated by anyone. Not by the alien forces who had once looked down upon them, not by the galactic powers who thought humanity would always be a backwater species. Easily overlooked, dismissed, and ignored, Jonathan now understood that the very things that made humans appear weak were in fact the traits that made them formidable. The ability to endure, the ability to adapt, the relentless drive to survive, no matter the odds. This was what he had been designed to embody, what he was created to represent: the fury and resilience of humanity. And now he could feel the power inside of him, awakening each memory, each flash of a battle fought on alien worlds where humanity had been crushed by enemies far more advanced than them, only to rise again and defeat them, felt like a part of him coming alive, like every cell in his body was remembering its true purpose. Remembering that humanity was not just a race of fragile beings struggling to survive in the universe. They were a force to be reckoned with. A force that would never bow down or be defeated, no matter what came their way. As the memories continued to flood his mind, Jonathan began to see the galaxy differently. He saw it not as a vast cold place, full of indifferent civilizations, but as a battleground full of opportunities to prove humanity's strength, to show that even the weakest among them could rise up and crush their enemies when they were pushed too far. The universe had made the mistake of thinking humans were weak, and that mistake would cost them everything. Because Jonathan understood now that humanity's greatest strength was not in their technology or their military might. It was in their ability to fight with everything they had, to never give up, to find ways to survive where others would perish, to always rise again, even when it seemed impossible. Humanity had a fire in them. A fire that burned brighter. The more it was stoked, the more they were oppressed, the more they fought back. And now, Jonathan was becoming the living embodiment of that power, of that resilience. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. Every memory, every battle was teaching him more about the potential that had been locked inside of him for so long. And with each passing day, he became more and more like the soldier he was meant to be. No longer just a man, but a weapon forged from humanity's greatest strengths. He knew now what he was meant to do. He was not meant to live a life of peace or quiet study. He was meant to fight, to protect his people, to lead them into a new age of power and dominance in the galaxy. And he would stop at nothing to make them realize the true strength of humanity. Nothing would stand in his way. Not the alien forces that had once dismissed them. Not the galactic empires that had tried to subjugate them, and certainly not the forces that had created him. Because Jonathan Reed was no longer just a man from Earth. He was Subject E7R31D, the weapon of humanity's future, and he was ready to unleash the full fury of that future upon anyone who dared to stand against him. The universe would remember. Humanity, they would remember the name Jonathan Reed, not as a scholar, not as a man, but as the force that changed the course of galactic history, the living embodiment of humanity's power and resilience. And no matter how far the galaxy had gone, or how many advanced species they encountered, They would soon learn that no one underestimated humanity ever again, because Jonathan understood now that the true weapon of humanity was not their technology, not their weapons, but their will to survive and conquer against all odds, and that was something that no enemy in the galaxy could ever match.